Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Avery, host of Classic Business on radio in Joburg in Cape Town, anchor of the Covid-19 Business Watch Daily Show on BDTV, and also for my sins, editor of Catalyst Private Equity magazine. I hope you've got your coffee and a notebook handy, or your tea, whatever keeps you warm on this very chilly winter's day. And by now, your grey mat has defrosted just a little as this cold front sweeps across the country. Hopefully, we can warm you up a little bit more and inspire you with some rich insights during the next 60 minutes as we take a ticket to board the rocket ship. That is entrepreneurship, because that's what it certainly is to me. It represents the very best of us. It's our drive, it's our desire to solve problems, our purpose, and our why, as Simon Sinek would say. And clearly, the COVID pandemic is a meteor shower that threatens many SME rocket ships at this time, but I think those that make it through to the other side will be all the better for it. And we know the stats, we've read the surveys, we know it's bad out there, and hopefully this next hour we can help you when people ask you what you do for a living, answer whatever it takes, because that's really the kind of mindset that one is going to need to get through this particular crisis. Just briefly, I'd like to thank our partners on this journey, Mail and Guardian, under a new editor, C4 Kings. He's just recently put his feet under the desk, and another great edition out today. Thanks so much to all of you. I think over 700 who've registered for supporting independent journalism in South Africa and the Mail and Guardian. And I think through your simple subscription, you can secure the future of a strong, free and independent media. And I think we need it now more than ever. And also to our sponsors, ABSA, who are displaying typical Africanacity at this time, supporting a whole range of sectors, and have partnered with the Mail and Guardian on a series of webinars. Last week, we were speaking about the automotive industry. Tonight, or today, we're talking about the SME sector, and really great to see the bank getting behind SMEs in the country at this time. Now, just to mention some housekeeping rules before I introduce your panelists in front of you, you're going to have to keep your questions to the chat function, but we'll try and get through as many of them as we can. That's on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll be putting those to your panelists during the course of the next 60 minutes. And if the room hangs or freezes, don't worry, we are on a very stable platform, but anything can happen. If it does, we have a panic button that'll help us reboot and generate a fresh room within 60 seconds. So don't go anywhere. Maybe use that as an opportunity to go grab yourself another cup of tea or coffee, but we certainly won't be going anywhere. We'll be going to another room, but I'm sure we're all on very stable lines. It looks like it's a good room today. Now, we've assembled a formidable panel for you today. Let's start with inviting our guest from the public sector, Mutlato Maholwa, Deputy Director General for Economic Planning in the Gauteng Department of Economic Development, and Acting Chief Executive Officer of the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller. He's an economist, he's a strategist with a wealth of experience in economic research, policy development and analysis. He's worked all through the private and the public sector. He's lectured economics, he's conducted economic research. He was Director of Economic Research, in fact, at the Department of Trade and Industry. He was Chief Economist at the City of Johannesburg, Lead Economist at the Land Bank, and also Deputy Director General for Economic Planning at the Mpumalanga Department of Economic Development and Tourism. And he's also spent a bit of time in the US. He holds an MSc from Michigan State University. So I think I can say go Spartans with great confidence. Welcome, Deputy DG. We've also got Oscar Saziba, Managing Executive for ABSA Relationship Banking. That's coverage for Gauteng and Limpopo. He's got an MBA from WITS, BCom, and has completed the Management Development Program at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. In addition, Oscar has completed International Executive Development Programs at London Business School and WITS Business School, and has a range of experience to bring to this conversation around how banks in particular help SMEs at a time like this. And lastly, I think a man who needs very little introduction, Vusi Thembekwayo, a businessman, author, public speaker, venture capitalist, all-around rock star. At 25, if you didn't know, Vusi ran a 400 million rand division in a 17 billion rand multinational. I don't know what you were doing at 25. I think I was trying to wrap up a 5-year degree. Vusi was amongst the youngest directors of a listed company in the country, and he now serves on several boards. He's someone who's carved out a unique space in venture capital as well. So, Vusi, welcome. Great to have you join us. And I think with that, I'm going to get you to kick us off here. And I was watching another rock star in the world of kind of small business public speaking last night, Simon Sinek. And he was addressing a South African audience. And, you know, he said a small business owner owns a business. An entrepreneur solves problems. And I think as SMEs exit this lockdown, it's like emerging a little bit from cryostasis to find the world a new and challenging place. Your customers are going to behave differently. Your suppliers are under different kinds of pressures. And I think the only thing we can be sure of is that this is the new normal. So with that, I'm sure there are a whole bunch of new problems that entrepreneurs can solve as well. But where do you start to rebuild as an SME as we exit the hard lockdown through the various stages, level 3 as it is now, into level 2 and 1 and beyond?
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for having me on this panel. We're clearly going through something that's very difficult and interesting, and both of those terms with their equal nuance kind of give a picture of the moment. It's hard to understand what the South African economy is, and at a macro level, very difficult to understand what the South African economy is because it's shifted so fundamentally. Just last night, I was looking at the GDP mix, and I'm not even sure if manufacturing is still 12% of our GDP. I don't know if financial services is still the bulk of our GDP because we really don't know the impact that this has had on the mix of our GDP. What we do know is it certainly isn't the way it was before. Suffice it to say that I think the single most important thing for every single entrepreneur to be doing right now is proximity to customer. It is the single most important thing. Trying to get as close to your customers as possible because they'll give you the information, the knowledge, and the insight about where we are. At a macro level, the difficulty is we don't know what our economy is. Are we a services economy? Are we a primary economy? Are we a manufacturing economy? Are we an industrial economy? Are we a financial services economy? We just really don't know. And I think we're not going to know, certainly not for the next 12 months. So if you're an entrepreneur out there and you're running a business, this is the area to get close to customers because they'll tell you where the short-term opportunities are.
I think it's a great place to start because many businesses, and we hear this word pivot all the time. I think it's almost used, it's overused at this time. And when we speak of pivoting, I see many businesses looking inward and saying, how do we pivot around our skill set? And what you're saying is put the customer at the center, and you will then see where that pivot opportunity is. And I think it's a very important distinction that. Oscar, to bring you in on the finance side of things, what do you think are some of the key elements inside a small business now that must be financially re-engineered or looked after when reopening after the lockdown?
Look, I think the most important thing that the businesses need to start thinking about is really looking at their business models, thinking about the different ways of attacking the market. And I can't repeat what Vusi has just said now. Just understand your customers during this period, stay close to your customers, understand what their new needs are, because what you used to sell yesterday is not what you're going to be selling tomorrow. And I've been amazed about how many SMEs that have come out in the recent months that all of a sudden people are selling masks, people that used to sell suits. And that's the kind of the things that the SMEs need to look at. Revise your cost, look at where the opportunities are, plan on what you're going to do when you reopen or you re-enter, and think about what your core business is all about, because this is the moment where you need to really get a little bit thinner and get to what your core business of what you do. And that's the thing that's going to allow you to get on the other side of the challenge, of the other side of the mountain, and start bringing all those costs that you used to do and start to saying, how do I keep this ship as long as I can in this journey and get it over the line, and then I can start sailing through. Because I know with Africanacity that the SME environment is strong enough to get through this. And we are here at Upside to support them. And that's really what the question is all about, is use this moment, use this opportunity to relook and understand what are you really good at. And you focus on that, invest on that, and stay a little bit longer on it, and you'll get through this.
And we'll come back to that in particular, how one understands where the opportunities are when you pivot and what are the core skill sets that one would then need to execute and lead a team into a different direction during a time where we're all under a great deal of stress as well, due to the uncertainty that Vusi mentioned earlier. I think forecasting is so difficult, and I think that uncertainty only adds to the anxiety and how we manage that. But Motlacho, from a government perspective here, obviously getting close to customers, as both Vusi and Oscar have said, is important. What role does government have to play in assisting SMEs get closer to markets at this time?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think from the point of view of government, we are of the view that this crisis is a bad crisis, but I think we can also take it as a blessing in disguise. And I think it will help us to recalibrate our intervention as government and private sector. From where we are sitting as Gauteng government, we are of the view that going forward, SMEs are going to be critical to the recognition and trying to make sure that our economy is resuscitated. Because at this point in time, as Vusi will agree with me that more than 40% of people who are employed in this country are in SMEs, and they are the one who have got more potential to make sure that we can improve the economy going forward, but also create more jobs. But at the core of our strategy at this point in time, we are saying that as government, provincial and national, we have the view that we must make sure that all our SMEs have access to the relief funds. And we are also saying to private sector that this is not the time to actually blacklist SMEs. As Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, we are currently giving at least 6 months repayments relief in the form of a holiday. And we are saying that the private sector must do the same. At the same time, it's not a good time to even think of blacklisting any person, because at this point in time, again, as government, we are saying that we are going to make sure that all our SMEs, where possible, we give them grants. There are grants at provincial level, there are grants available at national level, and we are working with all stakeholders to make sure that they access these grants to make sure that on top of the repayment holiday that we are giving them, we make sure that they will be able to survive. But key to this is that we were also approaching SME development as a whole value chain, A to Z. And I'm sure Oscar will also agree with me when I say that financial support alone is not enough. You also need to make sure that at the end of the day, these SMEs have got non-financial support, which include market access. So as government in Gauteng, we're saying that we've got about 4 billion that we want to make sure that our SMEs, as a start, they have access to that procurement budget. But we also want to partner with private sector to make sure that they also provide market access to these SMEs. On the issue of partnership, again, we know that as government, we are not going to have enough resources to be able to support our SMEs. We're also saying that a partnership with private sector, with our banks, with any other private funds that are out there will be important, because this will help us to make sure that our rent goes extra mile in terms of making sure that we reach a pool of SMEs. In a nutshell, Mike, what I can say is that the role of government at this point in time will be to make sure that we de-risk the sector, so that the private sector is also able to come in and support SMEs, but at the same time, they will also be able to make money. Because I know Vusi and Oscar, they also want to get returns. So government is there to make sure that the playing field is leveled. Where there's risk, we make sure that that risk is reduced for private sector to get involved and take it to the extra mile and stuff like that. But yeah, I think at this point in time, maybe I should stop there. But we already have a number of initiatives. We have in a few weeks' time also, we'll be announcing some of the partnerships that we are getting into the private sector to make sure that our SMEs are supported throughout the value chain, from the production up to a market access point of view.
And we'll come back to some of those initiatives. I think some of them very exciting at this time, and perhaps where some of the gaps are as well, that through this partnership-based approach, we can all, in this broader value chain, help address. Vusi, back to the question of pivoting. And there's some great examples, aren't there? If you were delivering online flowers before the lockdown, we saw the likes of a net florist pivot to delivering groceries. It's part of their skill set. They know how to get products from A to B. And so it's a good example of how one perhaps identifies where the pivot opportunities are for the skill set that your business might possess. How would you advise SMEs going about approaching this? Because the last thing we want is for every SME to think all of a sudden they're going to be the next Take-A-Lot or the next digital business when they don't have the skill set to do that. How does one go about identifying where those opportunities are?
I think one of the interesting things about living through times such as this, with this much level of complexity, is actually that the simpler answers are usually the best answers, right? Now, your question is detailed, but I want to answer it this way, if you'll allow me, Michael. There are some primary opportunities out there. This is the stuff that you see every day. I know, 10 different people that were in the textile industry, whether they were making tights for the fitness industry or making suits for bespoke, tailored ball gown events, who are now making masks. That's kind of primary, it's elementary, that's a quick pivot that you can do now. Then there is the stuff that we are seeing that is incidental. So there are some businesses, the likes of which you've mentioned, Net Florist, who are doing one thing and had an incidental competence that they're using as an extension of the moment we're in. I think in the medium to the long term, the real lasting business models are actually going to get back to the very simple basics and core. So listen to this. I thought it was interesting that they said you can keep working if you are an essential service, because almost all of us think that's what we are. I mean, I don't know anybody who thinks that the work they do is not essential. All of us think we're essential, but it's clearly not the case. And I think what's coming out of this is for many businesses to ask themselves, are we really essential or are we frills? Are we optional or are we critical? Whether your client is a corporate or your client is a consumer, but am I critical for my client? The way we advise us businesses that either we're invested in or we put through our accelerator programs is we always ask them, where are you on your client's income statement? Where are you on the P&L? If you are in the cost of goods sold, then you're critical, because without you, they have no goods to sell. But if you're not in the cost of goods sold and you are in the SGA portion of the income statement, those sales, general and admin expenses, then you're not critical, because that's immediately what they'll cut, and you're seeing it. So what got cut? Advertising budgets got cut. Ad agency budget got cut. Marketing budgets got cut. HR budgets got cut. That got cut. But what companies really focused on and bedded down on was what's key and critical for us to keep moving and keep going. So we have, and I don't want to be long-winded about it, but we have an industrial accelerator program that we're running for some clients in the industrial space, particularly the mining space. I can tell you for free that they've seen a 200 to 300% uptick in business. Why? Because when there was a projected lockdown coming, their clients wanted to buy stock up front and hold inventory so that they could ride out the lockdown period. But the inverse happened if you were lowered down the income statement. If you're marketing or enterprise and supply development or any of those frill purchases, then actually you got frozen and probably will continue to be frozen for the remainder of the year. The opportunity for the pivot is to ask yourself, are you an essential service to your customer? It's a very simple question. And if the answer is no, then that's perhaps what you need to start rethinking in terms of your business model.
Very important question. That we've got a great question from Kolani Bai in the chat room. So I want to stay with you, Vusi, for this one. He says, Mr. Tembakwaya, very respectful. What advice do you have for businesses that are still in the startup stage, who were probably burning through quite a lot of cash, as startups do, and then COVID-19 happened? I mean, how do you ensure that you keep the momentum going, or at least ensure that you survive this period of economic strain?
Oh, man. You're talking to the choir. You're literally talking to the choir. We've got several companies in our portfolio that are exactly at that stage. So I think there are a couple of things there. The first is, if you are at startup stage, but you already had an MVP, minimum viable product, this is the opportunity to see if you can monetize that MVP very, very quickly. And we're doing that with some of our portfolio companies, right? So there's one or two tech companies that I'm invested in. We've immediately gone and said, it's good enough. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. There's that old expression they use in Silicon Valley that perfect is the enemy of good enough, right? And if you are in a startup stage and you have a good enough product, this is the time to go to market and go, listen, it ain't great. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it's going to do the job. It's good enough. And you price it and you get into the market and let the market give you feedback.
Yeah. Zoom, and we're on Zoom at the moment, has really grown exponentially, almost on the back of that. There were security issues, and there still are, and some things that need to be tweaked. But the time was right, and the product was launched, and we've seen, the results speak for themselves. Yes.
If I may, just very quickly, I want to make, because you touched on something about Zoom that is such an important thing. There are 339 people in this webinar, and I would be remiss in my duty if I didn't make this point. South Africans have a relationship with small business that is unhealthy in terms of its expectations. And this is what we get wrong. So Vusi is so used to being serviced by ABSA, say, that when a small person starts a bank, he doesn't understand what is in the natural process of the evolution of a business. And as a result, where there are lapses in delivery, lapses in service, we completely flake out the small businesses and we push them aside and we default back to the large corporations. We need to rethink that mindset in terms of how we're engaging with small businesses as consumers and buyers of products of small businesses. They're going to get things wrong. So the Zoom is a fantastic issue because they did get things wrong, massive security issues, but we're still using them. Nobody went online on social media and created a hashtag Zoom must fall. I can promise you now that if it happened in South Africa, that would have happened. So we need to rethink our relationship and whether or not it's healthy, the relationship we as South Africans have with small business and small business owners, particularly at a time like this, because everybody is very strained.
I think that's a very good point that you add on to that. And I do think this work from home trend will mean that we do start shopping and supporting local community type businesses more than we did when we commuted into the city. So opportunities there as well. Certainly when we're allowed to go and sit at a coffee shop, who knows when that might be. But I don't want to digress too much. Oscar, from the bank's perspective, there's a great question here from Nadeem Joshua. And Mutlayo, you can go on the back of Oscar's answer because he's asking, how is government and the financial sector stimulating startups during this period? So Oscar, what role are you playing as a bank to help stimulate startups?
Firstly, we are very committed to this segment as a bank, and I think this engagement is also a demonstration how this segment is important to all of us. A lot of initiatives since the beginning of the lockdown. We've been very close to our customers, proactively reaching out to understand where they are on the journey, what help they require, and we're really banking those SMEs that are in good standing, meaning you don't want to bank an SME that is already in trouble, because by doing so, you're actually putting them into even a worse position. So we're continuously working with them on how they can get through this process. A number of revised programs we have put in, a number of relief programs we have put in, but more importantly, also to understand in where are they on their journey? What are the new opportunities that they exist? How do we support them? Can they change some of their capital assets to produce the goods that are required in the new norm? And how do they go about that? Really deepening our understanding of the segment and understanding of the entrepreneur, because this time around, you bank on the jockey. You have to understand what the jockey is putting on the ground and how much effort, passion, investment that they are putting into the businesses. And then as a bank, our solution has to be tailor-made. We are not having anything else on the shelves because everything else that we have on the shelf is no longer relevant. We have to continuously listen to the SME and say, this is how we're going to solution you. This is how we're going to partner with you. We have also reached out to government. We have also reached out to different agencies to say, how do we collectively come together? A number of initiatives that involve partners that traditionally we would not engage with, where we've said, this is the time where we don't want to stand on our own. We have to have other people that can help us solution these SMEs. But a lot of packages and a lot of good stuff coming post-COVID or during COVID that we are working day and night to make sure that we are relevant to the new SME as the market opens up, as we get through this process, because we are not going back to the previous norm. We are not going back to the same knowledge and the same understanding and the same principles and processes that we've built in the past that saved us until we got to the lockdown. We're going to have to start thinking differently. So it's really around what does our new SME require and how do we support that? But I must stress the point that it is now the time that every SME start understanding what their core businesses is. And whenever they come through to us, the first question is, what do you need this for? Because you have to channel it to what you need it for. Otherwise, you find yourself in a worse situation than the situation that you find yourselves in as an entrepreneur. Huge commitment from the bank.
Absolutely. And why it isn't just about financial interventions. It's very often the non-financial interventions. And we hear a lot during the time of COVID-19 of non-pharmaceutical interventions as well to help flatten the curve. And there's certainly non-financial interventions in a business that can go a long way before you are loading the balance sheet with debt at a time where there is it's very difficult to forecast into the future, as Vusi said. So there's still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk. Matlayo, from government's perspective, this is the time, surely, and we've had it from the president down, to start looking really aggressively at things like red tape and what government can do to ensure that they clear away a lot of that red tape and help businesses from that perspective, because businesses are going to have to be agile, but equally we need governments and regulators to be agile and alive to the new normal as well.
Yeah, yes, Mike. Probably maybe I'll approach your question from two point of views. The first one will be in terms of personal protective equipment. I think as a provincial government, we've taken a decision that all departments, remember this issue of saying that all departments must have masks and stuff like that. So we've taken a decision that no department should buy protective equipment from any other person rather than SMEs. So to this end, we came up with online a system to make sure that all our SMEs who want to supply government with this equipment are then registered on that online. And you can imagine how many departments we have, how many agencies we have in Gauteng alone. All of this equipment will come from there. But we are also saying that if you're a small business and you get a contract to supply masks and you don't have the finance, SGP were also available to say that because we know that the market is guaranteed, all you need is just affordable financing to help you to be able to produce what you want. And we are saying that this is an opportunity for us as a country and as a province to make sure that what we have been trying to achieve for a long time in terms of emphasizing local production. So this is the time to make sure that, as Vusi said, we must start rethinking of what are the new products that are going to be required even post-COVID-19. As an African bank employee, you'll always talk about Africanicity. We're also talking about this issue of the fact that from July, we're trying to open up borders. So there will be a huge opportunity for South African SMEs to be able to start producing things that can be exported to this country. Otherwise, countries like China, Brazil will take that space. So from government point of view, we are there to make sure that both in terms of financial and non-financial support, we are there to assist our SMEs to make sure that at the end of the day, they help out to reignite the economy. And we also agree in the province that if we are not going to put the resources in the economic cluster, we can forget about reigniting the economy. The money is dry in the private sector. Banks are getting strict. So this is the time for government to provide grants, provide non-financial support in terms of marketing and all those issues. And I think for me, Mike, this is very important because if we cannot take this opportunity to make sure that in terms of manufacturing, South Africa is moving forward, we'll never have this opportunity again. And that's why I'm saying that we're also saying that the issue of cluster approach in terms of different SMEs in different sectors going forward is going to be very important to make sure that going forward, people will not complain that they cannot supply in bulk, they cannot do, but because if there's a cluster, you are able to benefit from the economies of scale and power of aggregation.
And that is an important point if we look at township businesses as well, to get into big supply chains. I suppose there is some debate. If you chat to someone like Gigi Elcock, he reckons we should be focusing on building sustainable economies inside the townships, and not necessarily looking to get into big supply chains there, but stimulating local economies. Vusi, I want to come back to the issue of non-financial interventions inside a business right now. And one industry that's been particularly hard hit, a question here from Aviva Hoekstra, is the tourism industry. And it's obviously going to have to completely relook at its business model at this stage. If you're a restaurant, if you're a tour guide operator, what sort of non-financial interventions would you suggest one introduces into the business? It's almost like a surgeon wanting to strip away the fat and not cut down into the muscle and into the bone to hamstring yourself. But what would you advise to do?
So, sure. Well, I think the analogy you use in the question is perfectly right. Your analogy around making sure that you remove the non-essentials, back to that term about the essential services. Here's the difficulty, guys. The world actually hasn't experienced anything like this before. And I think that there's almost a lack of the appreciation of the moment we're in. So people often reference health crises, the likes of the Spanish flu, H1N1 virus, even the HIV crisis and what it did to South Africa with 500,000 people there who lost their lives. Those were health crises that had a very clear Chinese wall between the health implications and the financial implications. This crisis has not only been a health crisis, but it's had a very clear financial issue for the rest of the world. Capital markets have dried up. And if you look at what's been happening in the traditional markets, those themselves have been so held to skelter, it's hard to call what's going to happen in the NASDAQ a week from now, right? So that's the issue at that level. But what makes it even worse, and this is the point that I wanted to make to Motlatsi very quickly, the world is flat today. So a virus breaks out in China. And before we know that there's a virus that's broken out in China, there's now an infection case in South Africa. And the instance we find out there's a person infected in South Africa, it turns out there are people infected in townships too, right? So the world today is we live in a very different time to anything we've experienced in the past. So a part of the presumption that the previous methodology of how we did things need to apply now is precisely what needs a rethink. I just want to make the point, Michael, very quickly. Then I'm going to answer your question very directly. We went into this crisis already on our knees. The South African economy had just declared that we were in recession. Anyone in the real economy would have told you we were in recession for 24 months before that anyway. Yeah. Before that anyway. Yeah. So we went into this already on our knees. We were beginning to see delinquencies both at a corporate level as well as at a consumer level that were beginning to touch record levels. We went into this with a 29% unemployment rate. So it's not as if we went into this ready for the fight. We were on our last breath and we've had the wind taken out of us. Your question was about tourism, and I'm going to answer it very directly. My expectation, unfortunately, is that there's going to be blood on the streets on sectors like the tourism sectors. And we're going to have to ready ourselves for that. The question is not whether or not there's going to be people that lose their jobs, whether or not there's going to be tourism operations that shut down, or how those tourism operations come back from this. The question is whether or not there's going to be big tourism operators, the likes of which we saw in the past, or we're going to see small operators that are beginning to dominate in that space. My bet is on the latter and not the former. I think what you're going to see is more and more people who worked in these large tourism operations who are going to go back to their homes with a laptop and a cell phone and are going to create a product and create a platform and get into the economy again, trying to generate an income. And I think that's going to become our reality for the next 36 months at the very least.
And what that also speaks to is almost an informalization of work as people go and look for these scaled down opportunities. I've got a question, Oscar, here for you on the funding side from Mbuyazwe Magagula. Mr. Siziba, has your criteria for funding changed post-lockdown? And if so, how? Just take me through how the bank is approaching its assessment for funding applications at this time.
Look, we were very quick, Mike, to get ourselves into the new groove, if I may use the word. around realizing that the previous approach that we had on assessing risk and assessing assistance to customers has to change. It has changed fundamentally. And I'll give you a few examples. When we went into lockdown, we realized that we needed firstly to say, who of these customers are in good standing? And in good standing doesn't mean that you're not listed in any bureau. It means that you've got a business and you're on top of it, you are in trouble and you need help, and you've got a plan on how you're going to look at it. We didn't go in and say what security you must bring, how's your balance sheet looks like, and what has happened in the last 3 months. To Vusi's point, we went into this lockdown already from an economy point of view, we're already struggling. So we had to revise our approach on how do we assist SMEs that are already finding the impact of COVID coming in, making it worse than what we're currently already experiencing. And our approach in that space has been a little bit lenient, but what we have been very critical on, and I must say this, we needed to understand what type of business and what is it that this SME is doing and what plans do they have if they're going to get it through. And we had a very interesting results coming out. In some cases, SME says, look, I don't think I will make it. And we said, how do you reorganize yourself? Because we can't put more money into an environment that is already vulnerable and it needed to be resuscitated. There are others that says, go back and relook at this, come back, and when this has been sorted out, we can assist you with this. So there was a very hand-holding, a partnership conversation. We didn't do desktop exercises. We met with our SMEs, understood their businesses, gave advice to say, go back, look at this cost line, reduce this. Can you produce something more or something different from this particular plant that you've got? What else can you do with your plant? And in that way, we're able to go back and say, we can assist you with this. But I must say, the critical thing that has changed, from a balance sheet and security, these things were not important during the lockdown and might not be important going forward in future. The key issue is cash flow. And it is businesses that are able to demonstrate that they understand the flow of funds. Who's your supplier? When is he paying you back? When are you paying them? When are you collecting? And don't keep money. And I must say this because banks don't normally say it. We don't want you to keep money in the bank account. We want that money to go out and secure more stock, and it comes back and it moves. And that has been a critical issue. If you ask me what has been the critical criteria of helping out, is people that understood their cash flow better and they can manage it. Profitability doesn't help you during this period, might not help you also in the future if that's the only thing that you do in your businesses, because businesses that are profitable don't exist anymore, might not exist in future, but businesses that are able to demonstrate cash flow and management of cash flow and entrepreneurs that roll their sleeves and say, I want to know where every cent is going. Those are the entrepreneurs that we are banking on, that they will carry us as a country, that we are banking on, they will create more jobs, that we bank on, that they will make ABSA a success, because those are the future businesses that will carry us through this pandemic and in future in a new normal as we move forward.
Well said, Oscar. And I think any business owner out there, and Vusi sniggered there, because cash flow is everything, isn't it? And I think, Motladio, I actually want to put this to you, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, because I know it's almost issue number one when it comes to cash flow for SMEs is payment on time, and ideally payment within 30 days. And it's not only a government issue. There are many big businesses out there who don't pay within 30 days. Surely now is the time, as we have this conversation about partnerships, and we all doing our bit to support SMEs, to really drive a campaign through government and the private sector to pay SMEs within 30 days.
Mike, that's a very important issue. I think if you remember, our Premier David Makura is one of the first few people during lockdown level 5. He said that I don't want to hear that SMEs are not paid within 30 days and we blame COVID-19. He said paying SMEs or any other service provider on time is an essential service. So all those colleagues who are in supply chain, they were essential service, they were working. So, and I can tell you that in Gauteng, all the head of department, the CEO of agencies, MECs, on monthly basis have to submit their numbers in terms of how are they paying SMEs on time. So I can tell you that in economic development, our target is 15 days. Our agencies, we say they must pay within 5 days. I mean, we expect them to be more agile because they are not like government. So Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, we pay our suppliers within 5 days. Department of Economic Development itself, even though the law says that pay within 30 days, we pay within 15 days. And we, because in the past people make a mistake, they accept documentation from suppliers without checking them to make sure that all is in order. Only after 5-10 days, you come back and say, but you didn't bring 1, 2, 3. On the spot, check all the documents. Is everything there? If it's not there, say submit it. Once everything is in order, you start counting first day. So paying a service provider on time is very important, and I think it's one of the key things that were killing SMEs in the past. And at this point in time, we can't afford that. And Vusi was talking about the issue of our economy being on the knees. From our economists within the department, the work we did, we estimate that at best, Gauteng is going to lose at least 800,000 jobs, at best, if some of our interventions that we're proposing, we're going to actually implement them. At West, we talk about losing at least 2 million jobs in Gauteng alone. And you can imagine the province is an economic hub, about 34-35% of GDP is here, about at least 31% people employed in South Africa are here. So you can imagine that we can't afford to relax. So we take this issue of economic response very serious. Actually, the provincial government last week approved Gauteng economic response, which emphasized at the center of it is SMEs. How are we going to support them? Maybe I should take this opportunity to add one thing that we are doing as Gauteng Enterprise Propeller. Oscar talked about SMEs who are in good standing. Not necessarily those who are perfect, but who have potential and they show that they are willing to repay back and they want to grow. As Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, all those SMEs were actually doing physical visitation to their premises. Chat with them. Check what's happening. What are their problems? As I said before, we're giving them a payment relief of at least 6 months. But we're also saying that some of them, they may need grants. I mean, you talked about the tourism industry. You can imagine tourism sector is, as we're talking now, is like dead and buried. You talk about people who have got hair salons. They're not generating any revenue, but they have to pay rent. They have to do all these things. So these are the type of people who will need some sort of grant, not necessarily loans, because you can't give somebody a loan who's not operating. So that's where government should come in and assist. And as we improve in terms of levels of lockdown, some of the sectors will come in, and we can also provide them with some of soft, financing. And we hope banks like ABSA will also be, because it's win-win for all of us. If all this business at the end of the day, they all shut down, there will be no bank. So it's win-win. All of us, I think, we need to come to the party. And that's why I'm saying that as Gauteng province, we emphasize the issue of partnership so that we can bring our resources together. And we keep on saying that together we can achieve more. Together we can actually win.
And one obviously has to, when you talk of grants into the hospitality or tourism sector, I suppose there are criteria against which you would be evaluating whether or not that business is indeed viable into the future, and whether or not one isn't just delaying an inevitable collapse, and which are the right businesses to support. Vusi, I want to bounce over to you on the issue of cash flow. And I think, the question now is whether or not you give leeway to your debtors, or should you be insisting on payment right now, and seeing that you're probably a debtor somewhere along the line as well. This idea of partnership and relationship building, how do you approach that within your business?
With great difficulty. We have ourselves obviously have been affected at several levels. From our operating business, we've had several debtors with whom we've had to have very difficult conversations. We're a global firm, so some of them are outside of South Africa. This thing hit them long before this thing happened to the rest of us. And so that began to eat into our cash flows, and that affects the strength of your balance sheet, of course. And then there are just times when we've had to see about how do we co-create a solution with a client. How do we defer? How do we take a portion of payment? How do we take a payment in kind? A whole host of other stuff. Really, Michael, I've had the privilege of being in business now for the past 15, 16 years. I've never, ever had to think the way I've had to think over the past couple of months. It's completely new territory for all of us. So that's been the first part. And then, from our investment business in businesses that we're invested in, we've seen that begin to creep in too, where customers of theirs have not been able to make payments. The difficulty is that if you cut off that relationship with a customer, if the typical business, if you're not selling a simple product, you're selling a complex product, you're talking about a 6 to a 12-month sales cycle, and you're not going through a 3-month crisis, and you're gonna forego a relationship that took you 6 to 12 months to create because you're in a 3-month crisis, right? So even when we've had creditors call us, I've had to teach them a little bit about the laws of time and the value of time. To go, look, it took you 9 months to close us as a client. I'm not sure that you want to do this because we've had a 3-month run that's not been particularly good. So there's been great difficulty, and I don't know of any particular business, apart from the businesses that are sitting on the margins, which are maybe 0.1% of the businesses out there that have actually benefited from this. These are the guys that have got mass orders coming through them. But I don't really know of any real business that had a real lease with a real landlord and employed real people selling real products in the real economy that's not been affected. If that's been your business, because the business was built with a particular structure based on a particular economy with a series of assumptions. That economy is no longer the case. Those assumptions no longer hold. All of us and have been affected. So it has been with great difficulty, to be honest, that we've had to manage this period.
And it'll be interesting to see how that starts feeding into things like disinflation and all those knock-on macro effects, which makes it even more difficult in terms of forecasting. Back to your original point that you started with. Oscar, I want to come now to the interventions we've seen. One of them, that 200 billion rand guarantee scheme, government-backed, SARB-backed. And there was an interesting tweet earlier from someone who's viewing this, saying that it's strange to him that this scheme should require personal surety from all directors because it's a government-backed loan. What is your position on that, specifically around that bridging finance scheme, and whether or not it's fair to ask directors to be giving personal surety, considering it's a government-backed loan?
So let me start by saying it's really an honor to see government coming to the party to partner with banks in this particular scheme to make sure that the funds become available to the SMEs. And that's really the essence of how these schemes have been set up. Yes, it's true that this particular request or requirement is part of the scheme. But I want to stress the point also to say that it is still an unsecured loan. From a banking practice point of view, it is still a loan that is not secured. What we are trying to do, we are not fast about it. We are not enforcing it. It's a requirement. But I want to spend a few minutes on it, Michael, because this is extremely important, because we come from an era of entitlement, right? And that's a problem, because if you are an entrepreneur and an SME and you can't demonstrate in these instances to say, I am also committed to make sure this thing works, because that's really the essence of what this personal surety is. Because even if your balance sheet is not strong enough, you still get it. So it's really not about what sits in the balance sheet that makes you qualify for it. We just want to make sure that you are committed to this, you are asking for it, and if you successfully and you get through this process, you'll be able to pay it so that we can help the next SME whenever that comes through. We're really trying to make sure that there is a full cooperation, full commitment from the SME, and more importantly, I can tell you now, if you are committed to it as an SME, and you commit to make sure that you drive your business to generate the revenue, we shouldn't be all concerned. And I think, we're taking this feedback from all our SMEs, and this question, Michael, has been asked in many platforms. And I can tell you now, we are not ignoring it, we're listening it. And I know that my colleagues and other partners and government are hearing this, and they might have an opportunity to relook at it. But I can assure you, it is still a good deal. It is still a discounted a loan that you are getting in, that in a traditional way or in a normal way or in the previous way of work, you wouldn't have been able to get it at the price that is being offered.
I just want to add on to that, Oscar, maybe bounce back to you, VC. As a venture capital investor, I think the model in private equity and VC is to align interests. And how do you do that? Well, you ensure that everyone has some invested skin in the game, because that inherently introduces discipline, and you're not going to be going and taking the risk and the gamble. And I suppose it's a similar thing now with the government guaranteed scheme.
110%. So if I may be an industry lobbyist on this, if everybody wants this thing to work, what they should do is just give the money to VCs, because we'll know who to deploy it to. We'll know where to find all the partners. We know how to structure the deals. We know how to meet the terms. But I did, on a serious note, want to make this very particular point, Michael. When we started this firm, and I started this firm with the great tutelage and support of Dr. Richard Maponya, who was our chairman until he passed this year. But when we started this firm, one of the very key bits of insights we knew was that money was actually 20% of the problem. The other 80% of the problem was a plethora of issues: market access, market knowledge, insight, technology, infrastructure, telecommunications, ICT, all of that stuff. So what we then began to do is we built around a support system to help the businesses that we were invested in. And let me tell you, almost every single one of the businesses that has either graduated from our accelerator programs and or is still with us in our investment portfolio businesses, where we've followed our rights to invest in those businesses, almost all of them have said, actually, the stuff you made me do, the stuff that I hated doing, that stuff is what kept me alive at night. I'll give you a simple example. This is a true story. We got into a transport and logistics business 19 months ago, run by a 67-year-old gentleman, and he was co-managing the business with his 3 children. And they were doing over 60 million rand a year in turnover. And they didn't have an accounting system. No accounting system. No pricing system. So if he got an order from a client, he knew the cost per mile, et cetera, et cetera. He knew which truck. And it took us 12 months to convince him to create what we call the second brain in the business, so that it could do that independent of him. I was on the phone with him last night, and he says, you will not believe how incredible it's been for me to be able to click on a thing, click on a system, click on the app and go, this is where the business is. So it's going to need a collective of us coming from different parts of the ecosystem to support. No one person is going to own this. Government can't do it on their own. Banks can't do it on their own. VCs would like to think, because we love our egos, but we can't do it on our own either. Everybody's going to have to play ball in terms of becoming a part of the solution on this.
And I think therein lies a great opportunity as well, because no individual, say if you're in the shutter business, can all of a sudden pivot to have digital processes, laser measuring devices to walk into a house and automatically generate a quote. You're still doing it manually in the old school way, and I'll come back to in 3 days. But therein lies a big opportunity, and to partner with the right businesses to help you there. Deputy DG, there's a question here from Mr. Zondo, not of the Zondo Commission, who's asking where we can register as SME service suppliers. Do you have any more information that you can share with the delegates on how they register to become suppliers of PPP and other services or products to the Gauteng government?
They can go to a Gauteng Provincial Treasury website. The link is there. They can also go to how to Enterprise Propeller website. They can get information there on how to register to be on the database.
Super, and we'll try and share a link with that as well to make it easy for all of the delegates. This is going to be shared as a recording as well, so if you missed anything, you can always get a copy of the recording and go back. I want to come back to cash flow issues, Oscar, and a question here from Neldo Comey. How can banks assist with cash flow without overburdening an SME? And you mentioned this point earlier that you assess whether or not finance is actually the right solution for a particular business. What sort of cash flow solutions do you offer as a bank?
So there is a number of solutions that we offer. First of all, is what is the product that you require to manage your cash flow? So, for example, if you've got a challenge with your debtors, to Vusi's point, is we will highlight that up to you as we assess to say, look, your debtors are taking too long to pay you, and you are also not charging them to encourage them to do that. And how do you go about it? Through our enterprise development process, we can offer you non-financial support to assist you with that. But the key thing is that everyone thinks that, to come and ask for money from a bank, you can ask for an overdraft or ask for a term loan. It's extremely important that we understand why you're asking for this particular money, because that we must tie up to your cash flow and what do you want to use it for, so that we can match it with the right product that will be able to manage and unlock the cash flow that is tied up into your businesses. So there is a non-financial angle, meaning that we actually have to teach people how to manage cash and what are the components of cash flow. And I think people will always assume that everyone understands cash flow, and cash flow is something that sits in your bank account. Actually, it's not. It is your debtors, it's your creditors, and it is the cash and also the loans that you look for. How does all of those things come together and be able to make you be able to buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell? And that's really the process of cash flow management. And as we look at your financials, we are able to tell you how much you need, which is one other thing that every time everyone comes into the bank and says, I want 10 million rand or I want a million rand. And you look at the cash flow says you only need 400,000. The other stuff, you can actually manage it in your actual cycle. So then people say, no, banks don't want to give me more money. I can tell you now, we have to strike the balance of making sure that a business is successful by how we fund it, making sure that we don't overfund or underfund. You can actually take a business straight to the cemetery by overfunding it. Because while they have more money that's sitting in, they don't know what to do with it. Then we hear this thing around, I'm supporting or I'm now funding my lifestyle or I'm funding something that is actually not related to the business where the source of repayment is going to come from. Or also funding a business leaker, because banks also do that mistakes where they actually give you too little. You choke the business until it dies. So we have to be at all times as a bank, make sure that we fund the business at the right levels. And I think at ABSA, we've become much, much better. We're also coming up with new tools. And I don't want to say too much around that are able actually for businesses to manage the receipts and the creditors as they come into the bank account, so that you can quickly take up actions that you want to require. And that will be also done on a digital platform. So we look at a number of initiatives that will enable SMEs to manage their cash flow much better.
There's all kinds of innovation, supply chain, finance, invoice discounting, all of these things that one can look at to unlock all of that funding. That hour has just flown by. I cannot believe the time. Vusi, we've literally got a minute left. And I think what I'd like to leave delegates with, as they've listened to the last 60 minutes, is a message of hope. Because right now, I think, as you said, it's unprecedented. No SME has ever been through a period like this in our history, where the global economy is just shut down like this. How do you inspire hope at a time like this for the SMEs out there to keep on fighting the good fight?
I think the single most important thing to say is this: it will pass. I know it doesn't feel like it right now. If your phone has been ringing off the hook because the creditors are trying to get their money, you've got very big deep personal financial stress for a lot of us, because a lot of small businesses use their personal balance sheets to fund themselves. This moment will pass. The question is simply this: who will you be after this moment? This moment, I think, is calling on all of us to really relook at ourselves, the way we think, the way we act, the way we buy, the way we proposition, the way we have value, and think about how we bring that to the world. This will pass, but who will you be at the end of this? You should be a better version of yourself.
Vusi Thembekwayo, businessman, author, public speaker, and a renowned venture capitalist, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Thank you to the Deputy Director General for Economic Planning in the Gauteng Department of Economic Development, Motlajo Maholwa, and Oscar Siziba, Managing Executive for ABSA Relationship Banking coverage for Gauteng and Limpopo. And remember, when people ask you what you do right now, answer whatever it takes. From me, Michael, cheers.
Thank you.
Sure.